Welcome back to Pandemic Pass. My name is Casey Siddons, and I am your host. This is episode 6 called The Takeaway, Grading, Assessment, and Equity. If you missed episodes 1 through 5, please make sure to download and subscribe to the Ed's Not Dead podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't worry, Ed's Not Dead is still here, alive and well, certainly not dead. Just look for the green Ed's Not Dead logo and you'll know that a new episode with the whole crew is up. For now, this is another episode of the side pod, as I'm calling it, Pandemic Pass. And thank you so much for joining me on this journey. And thank you so much for your feedback and those of you who have downloaded and checked out the other episodes. Please take some time to download those. They're pretty short, some of them, and I think they give us a great rounded out view of what this pandemic has meant to so many different people and so many great ideas and thoughts on how we move forward in the very near future. This episode, as episode 5, is called The Takeaway, but this one is all about grading, assessment, and equity. You know, one of the main frustrations of working in public education is the perception that change takes forever, if at all. And that's not really accurate on the ground, but you know, I did hear one time that moving a public school system is like moving a cruise ship, and you're just moving the one rudder, you know, and you're incrementally changing. And this pandemic, this last year of being stuck at home, has really forced us to rethink all aspects of education, and that's one of the reasons why I split this podcast up into different categories like this. But if you look at our public education system, from attendance to meals to what it means to be engaged, all the way to traditional school-based issues like how we and when we and what we grade, how we assess kids, what are we using it for, promoting equitable instruction. For this next part of the takeaway, which is, again, part of Pandemic Pass, I bring in the incredible, dare I say, I just learned this word, polymath, Rick Wormeli, someone with a breadth of knowledge and depth of knowledge in just about, it seems, anything you want to talk to him about. But really, he's the foremost voice on what it means to be, in my belief, an effective teacher, and truly my go-to source for research and ideas on belief systems, on grading and assessment. Rick, as an interviewee, is an amazing person. He's so funny, and he's jovial, and he's bright, and he's sharp, and he's quick. And as you'll hear in the interview, he takes us through what he hopes will be a major change to our school system practices on grading and assessment, and what he thinks our schools are going to look like upon return. And so we talk about a lot of different things, but we talk about what does he hope like we can do in terms of belief systems. We talk about the hunger for trying to do things better on behalf of teachers. We talk about what the future looks like in terms of grading and assessment, and we talk about what school systems should prioritize when schools get back to face-to-face, whenever that may be. And I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Again, Rick is such a dynamic personality and a great person to talk to, a great person to learn from. And I just love talking to him every time. And in this interview, just a full disclosure, I left some pieces in at the very beginning because we had started our conversation and we were just, shooting the breeze. And we actually started talking about education and started talking about the things I wanted to talk about. So it kind of went away from the structure that I had initiated or anticipated for this interview. And so I just left it in because it was a really good conversation, really cool. And, there's a point where it kind of breaks in between, and I'll note that in the podcast. So I hope you enjoy, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Well, thanks again for taking the time with me. I won't take up too much of your time.
No, it's okay. Don't worry.
How are you doing personally? Are you doing all right?
So far, so good. Better than I have any right to think I would be, back in March. I thought, there goes my job working with teachers. working in schools. Like, I don't know, do I need to become a barista or something? And then, of course, coffee shops closed. So we wondered what was going to happen. And my wife is able to work from home with her job. So suddenly they said no telecommuting. And then suddenly now everybody must telecommute, and work from home. And then I can't tell you how the world exploded with urgent panic over grading. And I'm one of those guys that does a lot with grading, but also differentiation and equities and things like that. And so I pretty much worked every single school day since March, whereas before I didn't have that. And I remember one a webinar with Alberta, and it turned out that 2,900 people sat in on it, from around the world. Wow. It was me and Tom Gusky, Ken O'Connor, and Leanne Young, the four of us.
Oh, that's a dream team.
Yeah. Talking about, hey, what do you do with grading? Now at this point. And that only just went up. I mean, I probably get, just before this winter holiday, I was getting 4 and 5 requests per day to come do training virtually. And about 30 of the schools said, no, we only believe face-to-face. Virtual has no place. Our teachers will never do PD. And this is over the summer and then early fall. And every single one, except for one of them, has come back and said, oh my God, we need virtual PD now. Do you have any more room left in your calendar? We're so sorry. I was like, no worries.
Right.
I understand. I'm sorry.
It's totally like in line with one of my first questions, because like really the reason for this podcast, my idea for it was to think about, okay, so we're still in this morass, how do we have time and space and a crisis to think about how do we emerge as a public school system stronger, more effective, because it's making us reevaluate everything that we've always done. Quick commercial break. Didn't I tell you Rick is a really great guy? Super fun to talk to. I won't take too much time here, but this is where the actual interview was meant to start. Enjoy. A bulk of your work with teachers and schools over the years obviously has been towards their grading and assessment practices. With this pandemic, we've had to reevaluate everything that was once an expectation of schooling, including all of our very own closely held beliefs. Given your mantra, for lack of better words, that I've used myself, that I've stolen from you, that changes in practice to 90% mindset and 10% of actual change of practice. Does this give you hope for what we can do once this crisis is over?
Yes, as long as we have political fortitude. Right now, because of political divisiveness and toxicity, some people might be battle shy, so to speak, or gun shy, so to speak, in that they don't want to continue to upset the apple cart to some degree, at least politically. Everything is so fragile. Right. Don't make me fight one more battle. I would just like to toe the line, close my classroom door, and have my private fiefdom, and listen to my own echo chamber. Because when you're stressed out, that is really a sign of you don't feel like you have control. And the sense of lack of control, everybody's feeling that because of the rising anxiety with COVID and loss of normalcy, teachers, students, families, everybody, loss of jobs, economic despair, racism, ageism, sexism, transgender concerns, phobia of this, phobia of that. All these things are out of control. And so what I want to do is I want to do more things in my control. And so if you're going to ask me to be that nervous guinea pig, I might decline to do that. Yeah. However, the larger part of the scenario, I think, is the idea that, upsetting the apple cart isn't always a bad thing. It's cleansing.
Sure.
And, I want to honor what California is going through and Australia has been going through. But, fire is a way of clearing out the brush so that new things can grow.
Sure.
And so if we can take that side of that metaphor and of course, respect everything that everyone with forest fires right now, I think you can see it as a positive, as a turning point. Like, holy crap. That's the extent of my swearing in this podcast. Holy crap, some teachers realize I was operating off personality way more than pedagogy.
Right.
And I need to revisit what I know on pedagogical principles. So that means I need to let go of some things with which I've grown very complacent as my shtick, because now I realize upon critical analysis and an examination, it doesn't really hold up. It's not as effective as I thought, because now I'm getting more analytical about evidence of student learning, because I want to be held accountable. And I really wasn't, I could coast on my personality and the classroom elements that were there, and it blinded me to what was really happening. So now, it's really me, and it's got to be pure as we do this. Yeah. So I think that's really cool. The problem is also that if the community can come along, there's a lot of I grade this way, I teach this way, we operate this way because parents expect it, or the school board expects it. And so we have to enter that one question. I think you and I have had the conversation before about, to what degree do we allow people who are untrained to tell us what to do? Are we willing to succumb to an untrained mind explaining how to teach just because we don't want to choose the battle? And again, I think it comes down to summoning that courage of conviction. If you have the answer to why you do what you do, Simon Sinek, first begin with why, then you find courage to and stamina to see it through the mechanics and logistics of pulling it off. But if you don't have the why or the purpose, you very easily succumb. You give in to what's easy rather than what's correct. So I guess I'm excited because this is opportunity for those who are willing to go for it. Mm-hmm. But it does mean we ask of you one more thing, and that is to do a scary thing and to tell others and try to help them come along with you. And that might be one more thing than people want to stomach right now.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there's a whole group of people who were scared about the changes of pedagogy that were coming about, but have, like we know teachers to be, they're flexible and they are willing to go above and beyond for their kids. And I think that my next question really talks about this. In your book, Fair Isn't Always Equal, which is in the second of 2 editions, just as a little plug. You didn't pay me to say this, but if you haven't done so, you need to pick it up. You noted in the introduction something that stuck with me ever since I read it, and especially in the current times. And this is paraphrasing, that the book itself is a beginning. It's meant to do 4 things. 1 is serious reflection on our practices. 2 is to affirm practices we are already doing. 3 is to provide language for conversations. And 4th one that I found particularly apropos was to feed a hunger growing larger every day for coherent and effective grading practices in a high-stakes, accountability-focused world. And I bring this up because whether we like it or not, as you said, just a minute ago, this pandemic is changing education forever. What are your thoughts on this and what our future portends for grading and assessment?
I have been, again, overwhelmed with the number of requests that schools are suddenly finding grading urgent and that we can't leave it alone. So there is an ache in all of us to do right because we're conscientious people. I mean, we're an ethical enterprise and we have no moral authority to lie. And it feels now like a lie to include things in a grade that really are indicative of the evidence we claim to be reporting. So I had the Washington Post, San Diego, whatever his newspaper it is. We've seen city after city, Chicago, Seattle, the Bay Area and San Francisco. We've seen, of course, Virginia, Maryland, DC, and that area where I live. Mm-hmm. People are calling me and others saying, oh my gosh, we have an 83% increase in the number of Fs this first marking period. What are teachers doing so terribly wrong? And I'm like, oh, no. That is not the lens through which you see this. Yes. There's a heck of a lot of other stuff going on that's wrong. It's not that teachers are doing something wrong here. I mean, teachers might be perpetuating some of the wrong policies, of course, and they might be just stuck. But it's a huge systemic change, institutional change that needs to happen. Sure. One, the intense need for dealing with inequity, and that access to technology, but also, sleep cycles out of whack, emotional cycles out of whack, people dealing with opioid and alcoholism and physical, verbal, and sexual abuse that at a new level never to be seen. We have more than tripled in the last 20 years, and it's only gotten worse during the pandemic, the adolescent suicide rate. And we have a tsunami. This is literally the word that more than 3 different psychologists and counselors have used independently with me as I was doing research for an article that came out earlier this year, that a tsunamic increase in depression and anxiety and panic disorder on part of students, but also on the part of teachers. And so, if anybody's curious about it, they can go to my website and read the article on that. But those sorts of things and the inequities that are happening, like, okay, so the parents are using the one machine in the room, or maybe there's 2 in the household, and the student can't sit in synchronously because they don't have access or whatever. In rural areas and some urban areas, they have to do some kind of portable Wi-Fi system or park a bus outside for 2 hours so they can download the various things, all those creative ideas. The idea that now that we are so conscientious, we're actually going to deal with inequities among our students. And obviously predominantly because of racism, and that sort of thing, and the microaggressions and implicit bias that, it was for some teachers, it was an intellectual abstraction, but now it's incredibly real. And they've woken up to that. And so they're willing to put, this is kind of a weird analogy when you're talking about racism, but they're willing to put skin in the game.
Yeah.
And the idea is that I'm willing to do hard work to self-examine, but also to listen and to try things out that make me uncomfortable and teach the way students best learn, not the way I best learn. Because my success as a teacher comes with student success, not because I presented something. Nobody cares what anybody presents. It's what the kids learn and carry forward.
Right.
So I think this is a great opportunity for that sort of thing. But there's this incredible welling ache inside of us to do right. And we've realized that some of the things we've been doing weren't right. Yeah. And now do we stand on the side of what is righteous in a sense and develop a cause that I will do right by these students and I will do right by my profession? Or do we just, let it go and crawl back into our hole and hope that nobody calls us out on it? And I think that the collective zeitgeist, so to speak, the moral atmosphere is one of, I can do this. And before I may not have had the tools, but more and more tools now are becoming available. And now if I have the tools, I'm more inclined to try something. A lot of times teachers are very afraid to try new grading, new differentiation approaches, new diversity approaches, because they simply don't have a large repertoire. So they're not versatile and they're not agile in their applications. Right. But now we're developing that through, Chrome extensions and apps and new ways of teaching that have been, born of necessity, of course, and innovation. I'm struck by Tom Guskey, who said in his latest book that came out this year on leadership for grading, I think it's called Get, Set, Go. Your listeners may know of it. He said that most changes that are positive in teaching and education aren't from imitation. Mm-hmm. They're from informed innovation, which I really like that distinction. That, I remember way back in the late 70s and early 80s in education, we were all waiting for other schools to buy their computers and make all the mistakes and get a computer lab, Apple II GS, TRS 80s, Apple IIe's and all this stuff. And I remember teaching logos with the little turtle and moving it around and all these different things. But we would wait for other schools to buy their computers and say, now we'll learn from their mistakes. And we never found a school that didn't make whopping big mistakes. And so we kept delaying purchasing computers. And then we realized, we're all going to make mistakes. Just do it. You can't wait for that all to happen. But we can be informed by what happened with others and do the best we can and then pass that wisdom along. And then, of course, today, within a year or two, your computers are almost obsolete, or at least your software is, and then make new mistakes and keep making new mistakes. And that's how you grow, not by finally getting to some kind of equilibrium. And, as Margaret Wheatley writes so beautifully, an equilibrium is a system at rest. It doesn't require anything. It doesn't impact anything. It's inert. And no school should be wanting to achieve equilibrium.
Yeah.
because that means you have no impact. We want to do that. No, I want a compelling disequilibrium. It's like, ships that are sailing ships, not motorized ships. The sailing ships, it's the whitecaps, man, where you're riding up on the edge, and that's where your sails are filled and you make the furthest progress. Becalmed waters endanger sailors. I love that analogy. I've used it on other occasions, and I think it really sticks here. I mean, at least it has catalyzing influence in our thinking here.
And I think to your point on that piece, like on the ethical aspect of this, I think a lot of teachers are either they're questioning it themselves or seeing it around them. Is what I'm doing, is it the moral choice? Am I doing something that is morally right? And I've had so many discussions with high school teachers where I'm at right now, where most of my experience is at middle school, where they are being challenged in ways they've never been challenged before. And like I said, one of the things that you shared either in a video or in a past conversation was when you ask the question of people, is this the morally right thing to do? When it comes down to it, if you can't answer that with a straight yes or no answer, I think it lends itself to some sort of reevaluation.
I agree with you, but I think some faculties are hesitant to bring in ethics and morality. They're like, no, teaching is devoid of that, which means you probably died as a teacher in my regard. Because why do you get up in the morning, go through the motions? You may have misjudged the date of your retirement. Let's have a conversation. Is what I respond to that, because of course it is. But people are loath because it smacks of bringing in politics as well, because morality is so closely entwined with that. And I wrote a whole article on that too. And lots of people have that, to what degree are we allowed to be moral in front of our students? Right. And whose morality are you going to choose? Whose values? I work in a community here in the DC area where we have a lot of military families, but we also have a lot of families that are anti-military. Particularly, I remember during the Reagan years, and of course, George Bush, both the first Bush and the second Bush years, where kids would come in espousing last night's dinner table conversation, trashing the military, and other kids, their parents are actually fighting in Iraq and in other places. Mm-hmm. And so then they turn to me and say, well, Mr. Wormeli, what do you think? Uh-oh. Are they asking me as an individual, or are they asking me as actually a faculty member of the Commonwealth of Virginia? Because as a public school teacher, I am employed by the Commonwealth. And so how do I respond to that? And so I in the article, I talk about how I made those decisions and how other people make the decisions as we do that. And then, of course, during the Trump era, people become even more divisive. And to a certain extent during the Obama era as well, but really it's just, catapulted forward in the divisiveness and toxicity in the Trump era. It's become even more delicate because people are getting even more in their own corners and refusing to engage in civil discourse. For example, a primary example, Congress and the way they talk to each other. It's not a good example to put in front of students, to be really honest. However, it's something worth engaging in. But again, a lot of faculties don't have the tools to talk to each other so honestly and candidly, or they're like, oh, don't make it so philosophical. Let's just tell me how to set up my grade book, which is kind of whininess, but that's where some people are.
Yeah. And we actually just had a conversation with Greg Crury, who was featured in the a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. We had an interview in December talking about he teaches in rural West Virginia and a deep red state and a deep red part of the state. And he talked about how he's had to deal with, just working with students who are coming in with talking about fake news and all this other thing. Certainly a challenge. So I encourage our listeners to check that out as well. I do have one other question that kind of talks about transitions from your last point. It's about the achievement and opportunity gaps. And as you know, I mean, they were as wide as they had ever been prior to the pandemic. We are now seeing that gap widen for our most vulnerable populations, our students of color, students in poverty, our English language learners. What do you believe school systems should prioritize once we get back into schools face-to-face?
What should they prioritize? Well, that word prioritization is huge right now.
Yeah.
Which of the many urgencies to which do I pay attention here?
Yeah.
And one of the things is curriculum overload.
Yeah.
Is this really important? Is it not? And I'm struck by Heidi Hayes Jacobs, who earlier this summer I saw make a statement, and she said there are 4 C's that you really need to think of when it comes to curriculum. One is, what are you going to cut out?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to cut back? What are you going to consolidate? And then what do you need to create? And a lot of school boards have said, by golly, they're all important. They're all equally important. And that's somebody who needs to put their, adult pants on and make hardcore decisions, because you can't physically teach everything.
That sounds like, you remember those 4 squares that I think Eisenhower created? What's urgent, what's important.
Yes. Yeah.
Whenever the schools, we'd have PD that would do that, I would always get frustrated because I'm like, it's all urgent. It's all important.
I know. But, it's Elsa time. Let it go. Yeah. Let it go. It really, we have to call upon it. And I think people are realizing, of course, in remote instruction, you teach slower. You simply don't get through the same curriculum. And especially then if you're doing a hybrid as well, let alone if we get back. And I think that I agree, I agree with Tom Guskey and his June 29th article about, it's not what the kids missed last year that we have to fill in the holes, but it's like, what do we find so leveraging for what's to come, so powerfully needed for what's to come? Let's just teach that and move on. But when people say, no, it's all equally important, to me, they haven't done the heavy lifting. They haven't consulted with their subject associations who've done this. I remember one time working with a math curriculum supervisor for a massive school district. And I said, we boiled this down to 158 power standards. And no. So could you help us, because you're the one leading the way, you're the liaison to the society, could you help us narrow it further? And we got it down to 82. And I said, that's still too much. And so we need to get it down, because usually there's 4 to 8 umbrella big power standards. And there's, secondary ones, those are broken out into probably 4 to 8 each for each of them.
Right.
So for you to say they're all equally important means you're not intimate and knowledgeable enough in the field to really know there is a hierarchy. Right. This is more pivotal to the students' future success than this one is. So this one, let it go with just narrative commentary, not a letter grade, because it's really not, it shouldn't put that on your radar. So I think prioritization, that's going to be one thing. The second thing is absolute training by every single teacher on differentiated teaching. How do I do different things? And that we value that. And we don't think it's here's the one thing that drives me nuts. We think that it's unfair or that it's going soft by extending a deadline when a kid doesn't learn something. I'm calling for every single teacher to be gently insubordinate to the uniform timeline imposed by a previous generation arbitrarily upon the next generation. Grow up, people. We've advanced as a species of educators at this point. Do not be beholden to a timeline. So if a kid learns more quickly or months later, who cares? The grade book is cumulative for the whole year. And wait a minute, we know even better. More and more school districts now are doing e-portfolios and digital portfolios that will follow year to year, because 1 year wasn't enough for you to come to competence with every one of these things that we think is so incredibly valuable that you have to learn this one, each and every one equally. And then we're beginning to look at micro-credentialing and digital badges that you see maybe in adults, in colleges, and now they're coming down to high schools and some middle schools, where kids are beginning to personalize what they become really good at. Kids in middle school and high school, great at Python, C++, and JavaScript, and apps and all these different things. And now that's a part of their digital portfolio that can follow them. And this is a very meaningful way. And now they become these mini experts rather than you must do this arbitrary stock sequence. Now, that's exciting. It's a part of creativity. We can really get into that. But the question then becomes, do we have the heart, the fortitude, the wisdom to sit down and say, all right, as a generation that lived before you, we think this is really important and you still should learn it. So I need to mediate your relevance so you see why it's valuable. I can't let you escape because you need to be a thoughtful, contributing, happy citizen of our future adult world, right? You're going to be leading us. So you have to know at least a few of these things. But where do I temper that with a complete dedication to student agency and voice and choice? I think that's going to be a huge priority, because again, students during remote instruction or hybrid instruction shoulder more of the burden of remaining attentive and monitoring one's own learning. So the idea that we will now prioritize self-efficacy, and we will also give you voice and choice. There's a myriad of ways for you to demonstrate mastery. There's a myriad of ways for you to engage in your own instruction. And it's not just you sit there as you passive recipient. You're an active creator of your own stuff. And I honor what in your life you bring to learning's table, rather than dismiss it as, oh no, my inherited narrative is the one you should adopt. No. I need to honor the narrative you bring here and see how that's valuable. And so now the teacher has become very aware of, oh, I was perpetuating this is normal, when really it was imposing my normal on somebody else's normal, and it's not normal to them at all. And I need to understand their normal in order to best teach them. Oh my gosh, those areas would be really good. And I think that, every year teachers should probably learn 5 new apps and invite some students to help teach them those apps. That we're going to now, it's going to be a regular part of every year of renewing yourself to your profession, is you're going to have to do that. I think those will be some of the big, oh my gosh, I forgot one of the biggest ones. Paying attention and laser focus, not leaving it to chance or the awkwardness of, I don't have that conversation, to teacher mental wellness and emotional wellness, not just student. That we really have a hard time. We talk about it openly because teachers are going through a lot of mental illness. And again, there's so much stigma with that. And it could be just, I'm having anxiety with my own family. I have already engaged with a number of educators who have newly discovered panic disorders and anxiety disorders they've never had before. It's been exacerbated to this huge degree. And now they can't avoid friends and colleagues finding out about it. And they've kept it secret for a while. And now it's there. And for us to say, all right, we're back in the classroom. Everything is back to normal. We're okay.
Nothing happened.
Back to it is really a recipe for chaos. It's like a willful act of failure, as Anthony Muhammad and other people would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, the amount of shadowing that people place on mental illness and the struggles that folks are. I think kids are, at least in my experience, kids are more willing to have a conversation about that. This particular generation, because it's becoming more well known among artists and famous folks, and if you're more willing to have those conversations as an educator and someone who you trust in a classroom, I think that goes beyond anything that a canned lesson could do for folks. And to your other point, I'd like to mention one of the things that I did in my own classroom this year was there's no real deadlines or due dates. It's you've hit the standard. Once you hit the standard, then we keep moving. And one of the first assignments I gave this year, I gave feedback to the student. He got the grade that he got based on the standards. And he said, well, do I get any points off for it being late? And I was like, my question to him was, no, if you've shown the learning, then you get the grade. And he was like, but how does that work? And he was so confused.
He's so indoctrinated.
Yes. But I felt like I had moved the needle a little bit. So kudos to you for that. And
that's amazing though. But if you do that, and any teacher listening does that, I would say, could you just make sure you give a separate report of those work habits?
Right.
Because that's where that can be recorded.
Yes.
And goes, oh, now I see. You're still reporting it, but in a separate place.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And I would like to end on a positive note, as I do with these interviews, because we can quickly get into all the problems that this pandemic has created. What kind of silver linings have you experienced with teachers and students in schools since this distance learning has started?
Over and over again, the epiphanies you just shared, the idea of, oh my gosh, I switched to this other thing where the grade was based on evidence, not work habits or compliance. It opened up all these new doors to students, and they had hope for the first time in their lives. That they couldn't do well on this type of test format, because I was looking at tests now as vehicles to deliver the evidence, not the thing they had to do themselves. That the test format was irrelevant unless I was teaching the test format. And now students said, I could do that through a radio mix. Oh, that's awesome. And now they're like really into it. And that's really cool. And then here's a really weird thing. I do a lot of work with how to minimize cheating, plagiarizing, and parent over assistance. And so I've been doing a lot of webinars, a lot of training for schools and families on that, let alone writing about it. And what parents are finding is I finally have a set of tools because, of course, a lot of parents, aunts and uncles and grandparents who are now living as their family bubble in one house are now sitting with their kids and they say, I didn't know how to help my child before. And now I have these kind of guidelines instead of like, am I helping too much? Am I helping too little? Like, I didn't know it was okay to go to a website and look at a model of how something was solved or answered, and then take that insight from that and help my child or my grandson or whoever it was go back and create their own response based on a model. And this has been so helpful to me to have these very specific things. So schools are reaching out, training mom and dad more and more. And of course, in the course of that, families are going, oh my gosh, why don't we pay teachers $1 million a year? This is not just about, as one person online has said, about warehousing children just so parents can go back to work.
It's not glorified daycare.
A state of the art, a craft.
Yes.
This is something that, this is amazing. Now teachers do this day in and day out and still have a smile on their face and are willing to go back and do it the next day. And so I think a new appreciation for teachers in schools is a wonderful thing. And then the teachers who have admitted to me, I had to scrap it. I had to not think it like, okay, here's my lesson that I normally do. How do I stuff it through a camera lens the same way? I now had to think of all kinds of circumnavigational avenues, routes where I could be more effective. And I realized some of the stuff I was doing was redundant or overkill or not needed or wasn't as effective as my ego thought it was.
Yeah.
And so the idea that I'm willing to tame my ego a little bit and realize that shouldn't get in the way, that I should be very open to candid critique of my practice has been so cleansing and liberating, emancipating in a way for so many people who are tethered to this way we've always done it.
Yeah.
And I have seen that over and over and over again. One of the other things I get asked to do a lot is can you cultivate your own sense of intellect and creative self? Because creativity atrophies after a while if you don't really pay attention to it. And this has been a golden moment for that. Now, I'm saying that realizing those little moments are sporadic. They're happen. They're hallelujah moments. But a lot of times teachers are just trying to survive the day. Yep. And they don't have the luxury of thinking big time like that. But when it happens, because our emotions are so raw, there is a welling that's so much more grateful than it ever was before for the idea that I'm a professional. I have a wide variety of practices. I can draw on them. And if I make a mistake and this bombs, what do I do the next day to pick up the pieces is actually a statement on my professionalism more than I have a lesson that works perfectly every darn time. So I think and what does that really mean? I have seen the extension of grace and forgiveness to oneself and to colleagues over and over again in a way I have never seen before. And for me, when I see that, there's hope for the world.
I love it. You end on such a positive note as I totally expected you to. Rick, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your work and how much I know our listeners will appreciate your point of view. And as we emerge after this, I know that we're going to be stronger because of the conversations that like you and I have and the way that teachers think about their work. So thank you so much for coming on the show on Pandemic Pass. And I hope that you and your family are safe and everything and your holidays are awesome.
Same to you, Casey. Good luck in the new year.
All right. Thank you for joining us on Pandemic Pass. Pandemic Pass is an Ed's Not Dead media production and was written and directed by me, Casey Siddons. Music was written and performed by Peter Crable. Thanks for listening. Be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps others find us. Find out more on our website at edsnotdead.com.